Understanding JavaScript and Coding Essentials. This is the agenda of what we're going to look at in this lesson. First off, it's an intro into JavaScript. Secondly, we're looking at functions and variables. Then we'll be looking at jQuery and other third-party libraries. Then it's about locating and accessing elements with JavaScript. Then listening and responding to events. Then we'll be looking at updating the content of elements. And finally, we'll be looking at adding elements. Building interactive applications. HTML5 and CSS3 are great for producing beautiful websites, but today's users want a more interactive web experience. Interactivity allows a user to take an action and receive a response. Implementing interactivity requires a programming language such as JavaScript. So what is JavaScript? JavaScript's a loosely typed scripting language that is interpreted by a browser. It changes how elements in an HTML document act and respond to user input. We create scripts with JavaScript, and scripts are step-by-step instructions that tell a browser how to respond to events such as a user clicking a button. The file extension for a script is .js. How do you connect the JavaScript with the HTML pages? Well, we can connect JavaScript to HTML documents in a couple of ways. Firstly, we can embed it with the script tag, as you can see in the first example there. Secondly, we can link a separate JavaScript file to the HTML document, as you can see in the second example. This is a very simple JavaScript demo that you could copy and paste into Notepad or any other text editor and just have a look and see what it does. Let's look at functions and variables in JavaScript. A function is a group of statements that are combined to perform a specific task. A statement is just a line of code that performs an action of some sort. Statements should end with a semicolon. If different parts of a script repeat the same task, then you can reuse a function instead of repeating the same statements. Below you have a function called doSomethingAwesome that requires the creation of a variable called name, which is created when you're prompted for your name and you type it in. That then creates an alert, which is a little box basically that appears on, just outside the web page, and uses the variable name plus some text. How do you define a function? Okay, so this is the way that you can do it. You use the function keyword, then you make up a function name, something hopefully descriptive that describes what the function does. Then you would have brackets afterwards, which may contain some values or variables, and within the curly braces you have a code block, and inside that code block would be one or more statements. Naming functions. A function can have any name, but there are a couple of guidelines that must be considered. Firstly, don't use any of the reserved words defined by JavaScript standards. You can see the full list of JavaScript reserved words at the link on the page. Secondly, the name must be made of letters, digits, underscores or dollar signs, but it cannot start with a number. On this slide, we look at the important difference between defining and executing a function. The way that a function is defined is different from how it is executed by a browser. A function's definition outlines its name, any parameters it may take, and its statements. Note that when you define a function, you're not actually performing any of its statements. When a function is called, the browser will execute all of the statements within the function. Below we can see the function that we looked at previously, and this is the definition of the function. And so you're essentially here describing what it will do. when we call the function, we do it this way. Okay, so we have sort of an input type, so a button will be there on the page, which can then be clicked, and then on click, you'll basically call the function that's called do something awesome. Scripts have to temporarily store pieces of information. These bits of data can be stored as variables. It's called a variable because its values can vary every time a program is run. Variables can be defined using the var syntax with a unique keyword such as height or width. This is how you declare a variable in JavaScript. You use the variable keyword var. You decide on a variable name, in this case height. You use the assignment operator, and then you assign a variable value to the variable name, and of course finish with a semicolon. These are the rules for naming variables in JavaScript. Firstly, variable names must start with a letter, $, or an underscore. It must not start with a number. The second rule is that variable names can contain letters, numbers, $, and underscores, but not dashes or periods. You cannot use keywords or reserved words. Fourthly, variables are case sensitive, which means that this variable with a lower t is different from this variable with an uppercase T. Fifth, use names that describe the information that you're storing. And sixth, if a variable name uses 2 or more words, capitalize the first letter of every word after the first word. This is known as camel case. These are some types of data that you can find with JavaScript. Number, such as 1, 2, 3, 458, etc. Strings, so any string of text would be a string, such as zombies freak me out. And it must always be surrounded by quote marks. So a string is always surrounded by quote marks. Another type is the Boolean value, which is basically true or false. Comments. So this is how you add comments to your script to explain what it does. It'll also make your code easier for others to read and understand. You can add a single line comment by placing 2 / characters in front of your comment. So anything after the slashes won't be interpreted by the browser. You can add a multi-line comment by starting with the / characters and ending with the * characters. Anything between these characters won't be interpreted by the browser, i.e. will be ignored. You can see a couple of examples on the right hand side of the page. jQuery and third-party libraries. JavaScript libraries are made of code that other programmers have already developed. So libraries include pre-written functions and statements that you can use to create programs. It's a bit like going to the library and taking out a book that somebody else has already written to save you the bother of having to write it yourself. You can use a library by linking its file to your web page, as in that example. One of the most popular JavaScript libraries is jQuery. jQuery allows you to use CSS-like selectors and its methods to perform functions with minimal code. Some other libraries include AngularJS, React, Vue.js, Modernizer, and Unit.js. So libraries often provide functions for particular areas, for example the document object model manipulation, graphics, for example Canvas or SVG, widgets, unit testing, web apps, and so on. AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Ajax represents a group of web-based technologies that allow developers to create asynchronous web applications. These technologies include the following: HTML, CSS, the document object model, JSON or XML for the exchange of data, XSLT for the manipulation of data, the XML HTTP request for asynchronous communication, which is also now known as fetch, and JavaScript is what ties the technologies together. Certainly worth spending a few minutes on W3 Schools looking at the Ajax introduction that they have in there. I think that will be more than you need actually for the exam. Locating and accessing elements. Objects in JavaScript. An HTML element is an object similar to a house or a car. Just as with real-life objects, we can access and modify HTML objects that appear on screen. The creation of interactive web pages and apps relies on our ability to manipulate objects on the screen. Objects are models of things in the real world that were built using data. Objects are grouped into object models, which are used to represent browsers and web pages. The document object model is one such object model. So the document object model creates a model of a web page. You can see a typical structure of a web page on the right hand side. The DOM is used to update content, structure and styles on the fly, i.e. dynamically. The topmost object is the document object, which represents the page as a whole. It has child objects that represent individual elements on a page. Locating and accessing elements. We can access objects in the DOM using an element's ID. To do so, we can use the document object's getElementById method. This means that the element must have an ID. Now, this is one of the reasons why we use IDs in HTML. It enables us to specify a specific object on the page and then update its content. So using this getElementById method allows you to manipulate the contents of the element. This is a little demo using getElementById. It updates the inner HTML on the page with the current date. You can quite easily copy and paste this into a text editor. You can also find it on W3 Schools, getElementById, so either or both of those methods would be the best way to find out about this a bit more. Listening and responding to events. Events in programming. Events are actions that a user takes. JavaScript features event handlers which respond to specific user events. For example, the onClick event handler responds to clicks on the screen. You have a little table with some event handlers down the left hand side and the associated events down the right hand side. Event handlers respond by executing functions. This is a little event handlers demo from the PDF book. The easiest thing to do, I think really the best way to see how this works is to use the example from the book and see if you can get it working on your computer. Just copy and paste the content on the page or from the book into Notepad and then open it using Chrome or Internet Explorer or any other browser. Updating the content of elements. Use the inner HTML property to change content or insert new content between element tags. Inner HTML can be used on any element. To change content, set the inner HTML property to the desired string. To do this, we must use the equals symbol. To remove content, set it to an empty string. This is an inner HTML demo. Again, you can copy and paste this into a text file and see if you can get it to work. Adding element. The create element method. Make elements like images appear on screen with the document object's create element method. Add the element to the screen using the append child method. This is a short demo of the create element method. Again, copy and paste this into a file and see if you can get it working. You can also check this out on W3 Schools. This is a summary of what we've looked at. We've covered JavaScript, functions and variables, jQuery and third-party libraries, locating and accessing elements, listening and responding to events, updating the content of elements, and adding elements. Of course, the best way to learn and remember this sort of information is actually doing examples. So, as I've said, the best place is to practice using them on W3 Schools.